always I call them the globalists, the fascists, the cabal, banker cabal. They have another name. It begins with the last letter of the alphabet, which will not be discussed from my mouth.
Yeah.
The last thread I had was when too many phone conversations were taking place in 2009, and the topic was the last letter of the alphabet. So let's just leave that alone. I call them the banker cabal, call them the globalists. I think that's fine and well understood. There's been good progress. That's my point. There's been good progress in removing the middle layers so that the upper layers, the upper level, the uber lords, the people you never hear the names for, we always hear the names of their top generals, like Soros,
right,
like Rothschild, like Rockefeller when he was around, like Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan, like Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs. Okay, these are the generals. They're not the Uberlord. They're the generals. They carry out the orders from the Uberlords whose names and lives you never hear about. For instance, just start with the board members who own the Federal Reserve. And I ask a question to many people, and I never get an answer. Well, that's not true. I have one or two contacts who have given me one name. I asked them, can you name a single person on the board of directors, the owners for the Federal Reserve? And I usually get a lot of blank air. The only name I can recall is Warburg.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right, fine. There's several names, and that's one of them, and I don't really care. But those are the people who awarded themselves following Lehman and that failure kill job. They awarded themselves $23 trillion in near 0% loans. And, you know, I like to joke. How would it be if I get a $10 million 0% loan? That'd be handy. Okay, I made a direct comment following Lehman in 2008. I said we're going to be moving to 0% quickly, and these people who awarded themselves the multi-trillion-dollar loans, they're getting prepared to buy up global assets when things turn very, very sour. I mean, they can go on a buying spree, and they've got a mortgage that's near zero for, you know, service costs. This is why Ron Paul has been such a champion in eliminating some of the the darkness and the shadows behind this activity. And you know, it's a real shame Ron Paul doesn't have a taller stature and a deeper manly voice. Because that's what gets you elected president.
Correct. Otherwise, he has that sweet old guy thing going, you know? It's just, but exactly right. He's got that sweet old guy thing going, and it doesn't quite work on a national debate level, and that's why he's been shut out and smeared so many times.
But his work was stellar.
Yes, it is.
Who can you name in the last 20 years who forced a Federal Reserve audit and revealed some of the dirty, slimy stuff like the 23 trillion and near zero? It wasn't 0%. It was near zero. My guess is it was like 0.5% or 1/4%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still ridiculously cheap for servicing the mortgage and or the loan. And if they're late, what are the consequences? I mean, I doubt there's anything at all. Okay, so let's move on to the first topic. I wanted to mention that there is progress, and that is allowing some of the cleanup process to go forward. And I don't know when that will happen. And we talk a lot about the sealed indictments, and they're now up to something like 24,000 of them.
Yeah.
I'd like to see just 1,000 unsealed. I'd like to see 500 unsealed. I'd like to see anything. I'd like to see 10 unsealed. I'd like some publicity on who it was. And, you know, I have some suspicions that it might be the likes of, say, Bill Gates
Mm-hmm.
And guys like that who are involved in, some genocide with respect to their foundations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on, can we?
Yep, absolutely. The latest meeting with the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, the SCO, we've seen two longtime rivals within Southeast Asia come together in an unprecedented way. And it's funny to see how the U.S. was kicking the Pakistanis out, then trying to collude then they're trying to, cozy up to the Indians, and China in one foul swoop, along with, Xi Jinping and President Putin, working on the sidelines to get both of these powers together in the SCO is quite remarkable. What's your take on this latest development, Jen?
I think we're starting to see a real coalescence of the Eurasian trade zone. I know that you didn't mention by name the Eurasian trade zone or the Eurasian Economic Union.
Yeah.
Or the last thing we need is another EEUU. I don't like calling it the Eurasian Economic Union. I like calling it the Eurasian Trade Zone, the
Right.
ETZ. Okay. We are seeing the Eurasian Trade Zone come together in the form of a security pact, a security alliance that is called SCO, Shanghai Co-op Org. But I believe it's going to eventually be more important, more overshadowing, and more influential than NATO. The United States has corrupted NATO. It used to be a security alliance, and now it's more like a war path, beating drum organization. It's an organization, an alliance, NATO is, where treaties are being violated in order to comply with Washington wishes to arm the borders and to surround Russia and then blame Russia for aggression. Since when does surrounding Russia with, several different countries and missiles everywhere on their border, since when is that evidence of Russia's aggression? The aggression is with NATO, and NATO is seemingly a target by Trump to weaken and to, I think, fracture. When he goes to France and Germany and tells them you need to pay a bigger bill on NATO, they come back and say, well, we don't want to. We'd rather have our own European military related and tied to the European Union. So why don't you get lost? Okay, that's the response. And I think Trump is a very clever guy. A lot of people regard him as a bit of a boob, and I don't. I think that's his public persona. I mean, when I have something dangerous to say in a small group, I sometimes present myself as a clown.
Right.
To defuse the tension. And, here's an example. When people ask me, Jim, I'm going to meet you for dinner in front of the hotel, the Gran Hotel de Costa Rica, next to the museum, the theater, the National Theater, how will I recognize you? I mean, I realize this is potentially risky, so I say, well, I'm the guy who'll have Hasidic curls on my sideburns and a Mexican sombrero. Okay, got to defuse this.
Right.
Okay, so Trump comes across as a boob, and I think what he's trying to do is to end NATO, not properly finance it. I think he realizes that it is a grand problem, arming the Baltic states, violating NATO treaties, and then accusing Russia of aggression. It's the absolute opposite. Okay, so you have with SCO, suddenly, two of the most bitter rivals in all of the Eastern Hemisphere. I mean, you could point to the Saudis and the Iranians. That's fine. I think when you point to the India and Pakistan, you're dealing with another higher level of conflict that's going on for years.
Yeah.
They're both nuclear powers. Iran and Saudi are not. They have enormous population, like 1.3 billion. And suddenly SCO doubled in population. Suddenly. And who's the last to notice? The American public. Who's the last to acknowledge? The United States government. Okay, they're now part of the Eurasian Trade Zone Security Alliance. Now, this started out, SCO, I studied this way back in 04 and 05 when I started the newsletter. I was thinking, this SCO is going to grow. And I don't know what it's going to become. But let's just look at the nations that are in it. Well, to begin with, there was the former Soviet republics. And I said, okay, yawn, that's not a big deal. But then it was more. It was China, okay. And then you had Iran as a guest member. Well, now they're in. And then you had India and Pakistan as guest observer members, and now they're in. This is far more than the former Soviet republics. This is becoming the core of the entire Eurasian Trade Zone. It's Russia, China, et al. And et al. Has billions in population. And not just billion, you get the poo-pooers in the United States saying, oh yeah, but they got their little rickety economies. The Eurasian Trade Zone has something like 60 to 65% of the global GDP now. That's not trivial. I've been saying for 5 years, the dollar will face a severe challenge when those nations that oppose it and seek an alternative like the gold standard in whatever form, when they form a critical mass. Because you can't have 3 nations going on the gold standard. Let's just imagine, say, 5 years ago, the Swiss, instead of going on their peg with the 120 euro, the Swiss announced, this is hypothetical, let's say the Swiss decided to go to a gold standard. Well, their currency would be small in the international sense, not a lot of critical mass. They might have had, 1 or 2 nations like, let's just say Liechtenstein joins them, Luxembourg joins them. And they didn't have any critical mass, so their currency doubled and then went up even more, and they lost their entire export trade. That's the consequence of not having critical mass.
Correct.
You are killed by your success, your currency rises, everything becomes cheap to import, but you can't export anything because your currency's too high. Okay, now move to the Eurasian Trade Zone. They got 60 to 65% critical mass on the GDP global scale, but they got even higher population ratio on the global scale. And if they go to the gold standard step by step, they're going to be wading in the valuable, clean, non-toxic waters. And they're going to see a success. Okay, that's what I see is coming with the Eurasian Trade Zone, which is going to see some protection by SCO and look to see the S-300 and other Russian missiles being a key part of that protection system within the SCO alliance. This is powerful stuff. This is NATO, I think, from the East. They're going to challenge NATO, and eventually they're going to face NATO, and I think NATO will back down.
I mean, NATO is going to have nothing left by that. Their division of transgender troops. That's the only thing they're going to have going for them, Jim. the whole division, the European. That's the EU army. It's a joke.
Well, speaking of that topic, I'd like to mention something. The information for which I got from my own sources. I used to have a really good source, internal U.S. military, high-level security, NSA but I don't talk to him anymore because, anyway, I don't want to mention why I don't talk to him. He's just not a good guy. Not someone I want to keep as a friend. But I learned something. He said, Jim, are you aware that the number 1 cause of non-battle, off the battlefield, non-battlefield death in the U.S. military is suicide?
Correct. Right.
And
20 a day.
20 a day. And I said, no, I wasn't aware of that. What is behind that? And he said, homosexual rape.
No.
He said it's not prosecuted. He said this is what Clinton and Obama have imprinted on the U.S. military. They are both homosexual, bisexual, and narcotics addicts. Clinton and Obama both put their imprint of, what was it? No tell, no talk, no tell. What do they call it? Clinton had a little catchphrase, and then it was with Obama. It was actual silence and what's the word? Damn it! What's the word? Accommodation.
Right.
But we're not talking about women being raped and committing suicide. I'm talking about men being raped by men and committing suicide because their officers don't do anything about it. Okay, let's move on. I don't think the Russian and Chinese military have that problem.
No, they don't. They don't.
There's something else I'd like to mention regarding the whole Eurasian trade zone, and it's another little acronym. It's TPX. Starting to hear it more, starting to hear the concept more without the acronym, but I think the acronym is going to grow. We're talking about Trump, Putin, and Xi, the U.S., Russian, and Chinese leaders, I think are working in coordination at a very high level to install the gold standard. And the gold standard will be on the economic side, where denuclearization will be on the political side. Remove the fascist elements and remove the nuclear threat. That will be the political side. And you're starting to see that in the Korean Peninsula and cooperation with China and a lot of things. So what the public is seeing is trade war, trade friction, trade tariffs, U.S. versus China, U.S. versus Europe, China versus Europe even. But that's at the lower level. And I'm starting to believe that Trump's posturing toward trade tariffs with respect to China is to force China to make concessions with respect to the Korean Peninsula, and an additional important inclusion in the Eurasian trade zone. So far, Japan and Korea are not mentioned much at all in the Eurasian trade zone and its formation economically. You don't see China signing at the table at the Belt and Road deals with Japan and Korea, but it's coming. And you do see something on the fringe. You see Japan working with Russia and the Sakhalin Island, which is really an extension of the Japanese islands to their north. I mean, remove the country barriers and the lines on the map, and you say, oh, look at that. Japan has a bunch of islands. They go way, way up near Japan. Well, okay, the top is Sakhalin Island of Russia. It's a big production center for natural gas. The Japanese want pipelines across Sakhalin into Japan to supply. Let's leave Fukushima out of this discussion if we can. But the point is, Japan, through their own energy needs for the last several years, is signing up with Russia. Okay, Korea's not. Korea has lots of weird little battles going on with tourist trade and China. And obstacles from tourist agencies and, obtaining visas and a lot of, it's weird bickering, I call it. Okay, but look for the TPX angle. Trump, Putin, Xi. They are working an agenda and they don't talk about it. Because if they did, you'd have the U.S. Congress saying, what are you doing, President Trump? You're talking about a cooperative venture with the Russians and Chinese that opposes the dollar. So we're going to have to sanction the White House, because that's what we do in the Congress. We sanction the whole world that doesn't like the dollar. You can't do that. So watch this TPX angle and see what they're up to more by inference than by stated headlines in the news. Very interesting stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that something is going on. I mean, recently North Korea has said that, hey, we're going to dial back the anti-U.S. propaganda. We're going to start cutting that down. The rumors are flying already that there's going to be a Trump-Putin summit coming up in July. There is some, and you know what? And I think the American public at large is very favorable towards this. They're very favorable in seeing these developments. It is a breath of fresh air from the last several decades of perpetual war, perpetual debt, perpetual war, that vicious cycle, Jim. So yes, it's great to see this. I believe what you say wholeheartedly. My guys are saying the same thing. It's there is movement. There is some things going on. Absolutely.
Well, it's only going to increase the rift between the American public and the U.S. Congress.
Oh yeah.
Because Congress is not going to sign on to this.
No.
They're going to say we don't like this summit with Trump and Putin, and we're going to have a delegation that goes with you so that they can sabotage it. I mean, there's just nothing productive coming out of the Congress, period. I regard it as a two-party Congress. The populists, which include the Tea Party, and the fascists, the neocons, which have both red coats and blue coats. Those are the two parties, fascist and populist.
Right.
And I think the fascists have 75% of the Congress, maybe 80, maybe even a little more than 80. That's how powerful the fascist movement is in the United States. I've had a couple of very difficult conversations recently. I don't even want to mention with whom, but it comes from the U.S., and it had to do with, do people even know what fascism is?
No, they have no clue.
Do people have an interest in knowing what fascism is?
No, it's easier for the most lazy of Americans. It's easier just to blurt out the axiom fascist and not even know what it means.
The fascists are accusing those in favor of democracy of being fascists. That's how sickening and weird it's gotten. I mean, can you imagine communists pointing to the outside, accusing others of being communists? This is getting so whacked out, that the intelligence level of the American public in terms of political identification is just rock bottom, miserable, pathetic.
Yeah.
I challenge people. I'd probably do it twice a month. Do you know what fascism is? Can you define it? Can you give me an example of how it shows itself? And all I ever hear is, well, it's Nazi Germany. I said, no. I didn't ask for a historical past example. I'm talking about a current definition of how it works and how you see it today.
Yeah.
And they I don't know. I really don't know. So, okay, then you are with the Bush family with the 80 IQ.
Correct.
That's a lot of them.
You look at most of these Antifa idiots that are out there, right? These idiots wouldn't know fascism if it came up and snuck up behind them and gave them a wedgie. They wouldn't know that.
It's a nice image. All right, let me move on to topic 2, because I'm afraid I'm a bit long-winded in the early topics.
Oh, yes. Hold on one second, Jim. I apologize.
Okay.
My screen just went dark. Hold on, this is weird. Okay, topic 2. The other thing is this. We have a lot of things going on. Gold is on the move. What is the current state of the petro-yuan, the gold settlement that goes along with it? What's your latest intel telling you?
My latest intel, I love that phrase. What I'm hearing from my best sources and my brightest colleagues, and I got there are 9 of us in the Jackass colleague group, and some contribute more than others, and it's all very, very interesting and stimulating to get a little debate going. But we got one going a couple weeks ago and they don't happen every day. But it had to do with what will release the gold market. What is the problem with the gold market? And I made a comment that the exchange for physical, that is a new procedure that was brought into London, is so successful in falsifying the delivery that it is going to kill the COMEX and LBMA. It's just too successful. They're putting boundaries up and down on the gold price, and they've always falsified the supply. The selling, the paper selling, paper dumping. 6 months of global output just got sold in the last 30 or 40 minutes, and no deliveries will come at all. Well, what they've done is they've contaminated the actual delivery side to complete the loop on the fraudulent transactions having to do with gold and silver. It's called exchange for physical, EFP, and you get a number of people like TF Metals. Craig Hemke has documented some things that the actual physical delivery that they claimed moved in a given month was like 5 times more than their inventory and rivaled global output for the year. In other words, it's so much a mockery that what they've done is they forced legitimate gold demand to go to Shanghai.
Perfect.
And in Shanghai, you've got the gold, oil, and RMB contract triangle now in place.
The Holy Trinity.
The Holy Trinity, and it's really the Holy Trinity of the gold standard.
Yes.
It will enable the gold trade note to be launched. So what the Voice said to me and the colleagues, the Jackass colleague group, he said there are 2 events that are coming, and I'm not at liberty to say, but the 2 events are coming, and they're not several months away. They're not exactly imminent either, but you never know. And I said, you mean like, 2 to 6 months? He said, well, that sounds about right, but don't pin it down. It's not a long-term pair of events coming. There are 2 events that are going to provide tremendous disruption. I just put out on the table to start a discussion. I didn't really intend to make it my definitive guess, and I didn't want to get slapped down. But I said, okay, so we're going to see the Chinese begin to buy Saudi and Arab oil and pay in RMB term. He said, well, that's a given. That's already happening. It's just not much in the news yet. I said, okay, but disruptive events like that, but in follow-on. He said, yes. So here are my 2 events. They're 2 rather large events, and they're not simple events. The first event is the failure of Deutsche Bank, which will be an order of magnitude more devastating, disruptive, and ugly, messy than Lehman Brothers. Combined that, this is the single event, the first single event, is the failure of Deutsche Bank combined with the failure and breakdown of the Italian banking system, which could have an Italian government bond default. So the Italians could default on their sovereign bonds. They could have bank runs. They could have 7 to 10 or more big banks all fail, while Deutsche Bank fails. And little known fact is that the French banks have almost 4 times the exposure to Italian debt that the Germans do.
Yes.
So as Deutsche Bank and Italy fail, you're going to have the French banking system fail by contagion.
And if they failed, there goes the Germans.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying Deutsche Bank is going to fail. I didn't say it, but if Deutsche Bank fails, you're going to see 2 or 3 German banks fail at the same time. Like Commerce Bank.
Right.
Commerce Bank with a Z. Okay, but little known fact is that it's something like, oh gosh, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it's something like 70 billion for the German banks and 230 billion by the French banks in exposure to Italian debt. Now, I didn't say Italian government debt. I said Italian debt. The Italians themselves have €1 trillion government debt. The Italians alone have 350 or so billion euros of non-performing debt. They're sunk. They're sunk. They're just ruined. And the exposure is more to the French banks than the German banks. So look for Societe Generale and PNB Paribas to go down.
Yes.
Okay, that's the first event. Okay, that's the first trigger event that will release gold. In other words, when Italy, Deutsche Bank, Germany, and France all have their severe crisis that's much bigger than Lehman was, look for gold to respond in a favorable way. All right, second event. The second event, I believe, and this all ties with the Petro 1 gold settlement update, because when this gold response comes from Deutsche Bank, Italy, France, it will be noted in Shanghai with huge demand, with a lot of sovereign bonds like U.S. Treasuries and Euro bonds coming in, seeking gold. Okay, now the second event, completely separate. It's out of Shanghai. It is, I think, the introduction of the gold trade note. So far, all you've seen with the gold, oil, RMB, the GOR, it's being called the GOR Shanghai Triangle. You call it the Holy Trinity. I call it the GOR Triangle out of Shanghai for futures contracts. Gold, oil, and Chinese currency. Started out with just gold and the Chinese currency. No, gold and oil. Sorry, gold and oil. So that the Russians could sell oil and receive gold. Okay, so there's already precedent in selling oil for gold done by Russia, China. Okay, when the GOR triangle was formed, it really just attracted a lot of attention, and you saw a lot of volume come in for Shanghai for offtake of gold in the delivery ramps. And lately you've seen a lot of Petro Yuan contracts, the oil RMB, the OR part, the oil and RMB. That contract is now growing, and I think before long it's going to exceed Brent and attract even more attention. But so far, in the first several months, all you really see is gold volume for delivery and a lot of oil volume in RMB. And it's all well and good. But what's coming is, I believe, the gold trade note will be introduced for oil purchases done with margin placed in gold for a gold bill. It's like a bill. It's like a treasury bill competitor. It'll be a gold bill, and it'll be called the gold trade note. I was tipped off about the gold trade note incredibly back in 2014 or so by The Voice. He said, this is where the future development is taking place, and it will require a few years. It was either 2013 or 2014. He said, Jim, just keep an eye on it at all times when you see news and developments in the gold world, in the treasury bond replacement implementation. So when the gold trade note comes in, you're going to see nations say, we want, for instance, I'll just make one up. Japan wants to buy Iranian oil. And, you know, they're not going to do it in the dollar. Duh. They're going to do it in the gold trade note. They need a vehicle for managing the margin to manage the transaction of large size. The GOR contracts for futures will enable the gold trade note to sit atop it and to allow the Japanese to buy Iranian oil and other Persian Gulf, Gulf region oil using a gold trade note. Now, the poo-pooers in the West are saying lately, oh yeah, but the oil trade, it's not all that important anymore. It's only something like 13% of global trade in dollar transactions. Well, gosh, they seem to have changed their tune. 20 years ago, they were saying the oil trade and payment in dollars is the foundation and the core of the entire dollar system.
Correct.
Now suddenly it's not all that important. I don't think so. I think gold and oil will be inextricably linked, much like Russia and China did several months ago. The whole entire holy grail with China and Russia and their multi-year and $200 billion contract, it's all done in non-dollar payments, and the Russians are using the RMB as payment and converting them in Shanghai into gold as they see fit in the volume they wish. Okay, this is the prototype. And Japan is going to use this gold trade note. I just bring them up as an example, but it'll be far more bilateral agreements to buy oil and pay for it in gold trade notes and not the Treasury bill, which is the short-term U.S. Treasury vehicle, a security. Okay, when the gold trade note comes, there's going to be another side to this. I think the Chinese are going to announce a pre-announcement, a future date without the specific date, a future announcement without the date. They're going to announce that the RMB is going to be gold-backed. The Chinese currency will be announced as gold-backed, and they're going to give like a guideline of, say, June of 2020. And it will be powerful. And they will also say, this is my forecast, that the Chinese government short-term bill that will be gold-backed will be interchangeable with the gold trade note. So the gold trade note will be tied inextricably for a future basis to the Chinese RMB currency, like in June 2020. Now, I did not address the Chinese government long-term bond. I'm talking about their short-term bond. You can't have a long-term bond unless you have a working short-term bond. I think the Chinese short-term government bond will be the gold trade note, used for Asian purchases of oil starting in the Gulf region in the Middle East and moving on to Angola and Nigeria and maybe to Venezuela. Very exciting pair of trigger events. The Deutsche Bank Italian failure and the launch of the gold trade note with a pre-announcement of a gold-backed RMB. Those, I think, are the two big events coming. I cannot get a response from The Voice on whether I'm on the right track. But let me tell you this, and I hope it doesn't piss him off. I've noticed in the last several years, last maybe 5 or 6 years, that when I ask a direct question, is this the case? Can you confirm or deny? If I'm wrong, he steps forward quickly and says, no, you got that wrong, and here's what you're missing. And here's a bigger picture for how you can see this better. But if I'm right, and he doesn't have the ability to confirm it, I get silence.
Interesting. You know, it's remarkable that a lot of people are missing this component. These idiots in the West are saying, "Oh, it's not a big deal. Dollar usage in oil, it's only 13%. It's not a big deal." It's such a smokescreen that they throw up with that, because most people don't realize, Jim, oil is one of the most financialized commodities on the entire planet. The whole linchpin of the dollar system rests upon that thing, man. It's crazy.
It's very important. Although it is a shrinking percentage of global trade payments, it is still the primary payment in global trade. So if the gold community captures it, especially with respect to Asia and Middle East oil, which has an extension to Nigeria and Angola. Angola is a captured nation for China. They're given foreign aid credit in the form. China is giving foreign aid credit to Angola in the form of U.S. Treasury bonds. And what they get back is RMB currency from Angola after the oil is sold, like, say, to all their clients. And, they do sell in the open market. So they receive RMB and it goes back. China, in other words, is using Angola as a window to convert their treasuries to RMB. This is powerful stuff. This is how China pulls in Africa, West Africa, and their production centers for oil into the Eurasian trade zone, into the usage of the gold trade note for payment. This is powerful stuff. So those are the two triggers that I believe are going to occur. And, there's no exclusivity here. It might be 5 events, and I've identified 2. Sorry, I have identified 2. There might be more. It could be a big trigger event. Could be the announcement of the denuclearization of the Koreas, and a movement toward significant Belt and Road contracts. My gosh, that would be powerful, especially if Japan joined in. And then you can say, well, the U.S. vassal states of Korea, South Korea, and Japan just flipped into their own backyard of the Asian East. That would be enormously powerful and disruptive. And, it's guaranteed they're moving to the gold standard in the Eurasian trade zone. They're making all the different powerful platform steps. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, the cross-border interbank payment system, sometimes called the Chinese interbank payment system, CIPS to rival SWIFT. You got the Belt and Road. I made a wrong guess a few months ago. This was about March or April. I was talking with a couple of my jackass colleagues. I said, my gosh, I don't know the size of the Belt and Road right now, but if I had to guess, I'd say they got a couple $1 trillion. I thought I was high. No, the Belt and Road has $8 trillion in projects lined up.
Correct.
And they've begun on many of them. Not all of them, not even the majority, but they're getting things lined up. They're getting their contractors lined up, their financiers lined up. China is hosting the table.
Yes,
where
they are.
People come, the contractors, financiers, the government officials, and other organizations that are involved in planning, like economic finance groups. It's $8 trillion. It's all non-dollar, and the United States is just barely in the door. I remember a few months ago, I put a note out, and it might have been around the March hat-trick letter. I said, General Electric has got themselves a small presence at the Belt and Road Initiative table. And now it's more like about 5 or 6 U.S. corporations. They're realizing this is going to be a powerful future impetus. While the United States is busy with a new war every few months and arms sales, the Chinese are busy signing multi-trillion-dollar construction deals for the infrastructure that Trump promised and never delivered. Trump is hamstrung. Trump has his hands tied. He cannot do the $1 trillion U.S. reindustrialization through infrastructure because we're too busy with war.
Yeah.
War is destructive of economies, even though the Keynesians have twisted the message and are telling us that war is good for economic growth and produces jobs. I don't think so. I think Jack Ma, CEO of Alibaba, got it right when at a forum, what was it, the Davos Forum several months ago, almost a year ago, said, what has the United States gained from 20 to 25 trillion in Pentagon appropriations and military spending in the last 3 decades? Nothing. All you've got is enemies produced.
Mm-hmm.
So we go in, we disrupt the nation, we bring in our Langley guys, bring in the NGOs, we destabilize. If they don't go along, we bomb the hell out of them, we destroy their economy. My gosh, the estimates for rebuilding the Syrian economy now is something like $200 billion. So is that a mission accomplished, Washington? And they've turned east They're looking to Russia and China for development and protection. Golly, we are so messed up in our priorities. War, and war are our top. I'm sorry. War, and bond fraud are our top three. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. War, bond fraud, and laced vaccines and big pharma collusion are our three top priorities for economic growth.
That's it. And our biggest exports are trash, and recyclables. It's wonderful. Garbage in, garbage out.
You mean scrap paper, scrap metal, and scrap plastic?
Yep.
I didn't know those are okay. Can you be more specific? This is very, very curious of me.
Oh yeah, it's scrap metals. The all sorts of various trash that's hauled out to China, metal scraps, some plastics that get recycled. Those are our biggest exports. It's trash, recyclables, and that's it. That's our biggest exports. Nothing else.
Well, I tend to think we have a very big export in diabetes.
Oh yes, and cancer vaccine.
And by the way, I'm 6 feet tall. For those who are wondering, I'm 6 feet tall and 180 pounds. Okay, I am not obese. I do not have a gut, and I have a size 33 waist. I still wear clothes that I bought in the 1980s. And of course, there are a couple that are my old favorite LL Bean flannel shirts. I wear them when it gets chilly in the late evening. But their collars are all worn and tearing, and I try to sew it a little bit. But gotta let them go, My point is that I'm not an obese factory. I do like my chocolates. I do like ice cream. They got one particular flavor here in Costa Rica that it's a chocolate chip, and boy, I love it. I love it. It's not a big chip. It's little chocolate chips, but
does it have high fructose corn syrup?
I don't know. I notice that when I go on a little binge, like 2 weeks, I buy 2 or 3 of these little cartons. I notice, whoops, my weight got up above 180. I'm 183 now. So I back off and I ride my bike more and I sweat like a beast, and that's okay. I like to keep it at 180. 180 is my watermark. I like it's been 180 to 183 now for 10 years.
And that's
most
great.
People I know they and this is sad, but most people I know they gain 5 pounds every few years.
Yeah, or more.
My dad jokes with me. He said, "Jim, I'm going the other direction. My waist size is lower, my legs are skinnier, and I'm down to 160 pounds. I used to be 175. I said, "Yeah, well, Dad, 98 years of age will do that."
Yeah.
It's not like he's out there doing power walks at 98. He said, "Jim, I have a big challenge. It takes me 3 minutes. 3 minutes to get out of a chair."
When I show foreigners some of my clients abroad, and I show them like video clips from some of the American reality shows, like My 600-Pound Life, they can't believe it. They think this is not real. This is Hollywood, right? This is special effects. I'm like, no, it's not special effects. These are actually real people. Like, no, you have people like this there. I'm like, yes. So we have many, many people like this.
Well, here's another example along those lines. When I have friends over and there's a Major League Baseball game on or an NFL football game on, and they pan the crowd, I say, "Look, half those people are fat."
Yeah.
And they say, "Wow, look at that." And I said, "This is cross section."
Yeah.
And they don't believe me. I told a lady friend just yesterday, 60% of Americans are obese, and it's even worse among the young.
Yeah.
They say, "How could that be, Jim? America is a leading nation. You're a smart nation. You're educated. How could that be?" And I said, "You have no idea the influence of the Rockefeller Foundation."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely correct.
Where did the movement begin 20 years ago to put high fructose corn syrup in everything? Where did it begin? I mean, here in Costa Rica, I love their fruit drinks.
Mm-hmm.
Most are made, believe it or not, either in Costa Rica or Mexico. Jumex, Jumex. It's a great product line of wonderful Mexican fruit juices. They don't have the high fructose corn syrup infusion.
That's because they don't like freedom, Jim. That's because they don't like freedom. That's why.
Right. They hate us for our freedom. Right. Okay.
They hate us because of our high fructose corn syrup.
I notice I still do my usual. I've been doing this for 30 years, V. If I see some fat people, I look to see what are they eating.
Now you're fat shaming, Jim. You're triggering them.
Okay, I want overweight people to sign up for the newsletter. So I apologize for any attack, but you got to get yourself in shape, and you got to eat right, and you got to get your butt off the couch and do some exercise. I just bristle when I read that people are taking some increased medications from Big Pharma to deal with their overweight condition. Get off the couch and do a power walk. Walk yourselves a couple miles every other day and enjoy it. The fresh air, just get out there. Get out there. I have people tell me once in a while, well, Jim, when did you begin getting in good shape? And I said, when I was 4. And I said, I've never been out of shape. Well, that's not true. I got to mention something. I got to be honest here. When I had my knee surgery, I tore a knee in a wrestling accident. I tore my left ACL ligament. And when I had the surgery, it was grossly swollen. I was on crutches, and I gained weight. I gained probably 20 pounds. I got close to 190. It scared the shit out of me. My parents visited because I had an operation, laid up in Boston.
Right.
And my dad said to me, Jim, your face looks fat. I said, well, thanks, Dad. I think it's fat all over. I've rubbed the hair off completely between my upper inner thighs. So, that's a sweet image, huh? Okay, here's how I reacted, V, and I'm getting off the point of finance here, but it's okay. You can go back to finance if you want in a minute. But here's how I reacted. I realized that my left leg could not run, and I started riding a bicycle, and it was kind of awkward because I couldn't bend it right. I had to get a second operation on the left knee a year later to remove severe, what do they call it?
Scar tissue.
Scar tissue, exactly. And I got a sample of it. It's orange rubber bands. That's what scar tissue is. It's all orange, ugly. It's not beautiful orange. No, it's ugly brown streaks of orange. It looks like feces. Okay, feces mixed with nice orange rubber band. Here's what I did. I joined a health club, and I started swimming 3 miles a week eventually, 3 different outings of 1 mile per week. I got right back down to the upper 160s in a matter of about 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I did some weightlifting, upper body, not the lower, because my leg was messed up. And eventually, with the second operation, I was able to do the bike riding again and to do running again. And I had good ACL reconstruction. A guy named Bolton, Harvard Medical School. Yes, sir, Dr. Bolton. You know what you're doing. So, got a reconstructed knee from 1993. Here I am 25 years later, taking MSM chondroitin, glucosamine chondroitin.
Yeah.
MSM glucosamine chondroitin.
Methylsulfonylate methane.
I tell you.
Cyanide. I'm sorry. Cyanide.
It works. It really works. And don't buy those big pharma items because they cost about 7 times more, and the extra ingredient is not really worth much anything. Just go basic supermarket MSM glucosamine chondroitin. I've been taking it now ever since about 1998. So I'm at 20 years of taking it every single day, and I walk, I run. I don't run a lot. I can kick a soccer ball. I was on a soccer team in high school. So the World Cup is a lot of fun for me.
Yeah.
I made a prediction. This is, just Costa Rican lore, but Costa Rica did not look all that impressive in their qualification. I said to a couple friends of mine, and one local guy didn't really like it. I said, they're not only going to get knocked out in the phase group, the first round, they're not even going to win a game. They're not even going to score a goal. And he said, what? Jim, they might win a game. And I said, well, if you don't score a goal, you don't. Well, they might score many goals. I said, really? Okay. They lost 1-0 to Serbia. They lost 2-0 to Brazil. And I think they're going to lose another shutout today to Switzerland. It's pretty sad. They're out. They're out, and I got that forecast right. Reminded me of my forecast 2 years ago at Golden State after they won the first game, a blowout against Cleveland Cavaliers. I made a call that they're going to win the first 3 games, lose the 4th, and win the 5th, and Kevin Durant would be named MVP. And I got that exactly right.
Jim Willie sports betting, folks. Sign up now.
I don't do any betting. There's only one bet that I was very close in making, and that was 2 years ago. Ohio State should not, that's my alma mater, should not have been invited to the Final Four tournament for Bowl Championship Series for college football. They should not have been invited, and they did because of all the Midwestern influence and the sports writers and all that. And I said, they're going to get blown out by Clemson. And I asked my sportsbook buddy, what's the line? Clemson by 9? And he said, no, it's only 3. I said, oh my gosh, it's going to be 17-0 at halftime. There can be 2 touchdowns or more at halftime. 14-17-0 at halftime. It was 17-zip. They lost 31-0. I don't do any betting. But when the big games come, I seem to have a knack, and it's fun. I want to see.
You got to have some distractions. It's.
Oh gosh, you got to have distraction. I got distractions of sports, my bicycle, movies. I just saw the new Jurassic Park movie, Jurassic World.
Did you like it?
Very nice.
I liked the first one, honestly.
It was very well done. It was really well done.
Yeah.
It only lacked one thing, and that was a shower scene by Ron Howard's daughter, the redhead. She needs to be in a shower scene. Anyway, she's a very pretty lady, very pretty woman. Okay, so I got my distractions, and following politics is not one of them. I'm getting a lot of questions. Jim, what do you make of Q? Do you think QAnon is real? I don't get into all that. In fact, I don't even want to talk about all that. I don't know. I have mild opinions, but I don't really know. It's part of the cleanup process. Anyway, you want to talk about the Turkish elections?
Let's talk about the turd in the hummus bowl himself, Erdogan, and what is his next moves. We see there's a swing towards the east. The Pentagon has canceled the sale of the vaunted greatest super fighter in the world, which is the F-35, Jim. It's the greatest piece of machinery ever created by humanity. They've canceled that sale to the Turks, and of course I'm being facetious. But what's your take, sir?
Well, first of all, the F-35 is an aircraft that even the NATO allies don't want, but we're shoving down their throats.
Correct.
Okay. The Turkish elections could bring about some change in their monetary policy. They're refusing to raise their interest rates because they got damaged by economic recession following the incident about 2.5 years ago where they shot down a Russian Air Force fighter jet. Okay, they didn't think that through really well because a big part of their tourist trade was from Russia. They've not recovered in their economy too much. They've recovered some. But I'm hearing figures like, well, what was a 90% cut in their tourist trade, hotels on the Mediterranean, is now more like a 30 to 40% reduction in their tourist trade. So they got a little bit of recovery, maybe half or more. But their economy has gone to shit. Their economy is very, very poor shape. Now, here's my call. They're dealing with a drop in the lira Turkish currency. They refuse to raise interest rates to defend the currency, so it continues down with a little bit of Goldman Sachs help. It's kind of like watching a guy going down a hill and you give him a good push. Okay, now here's my call. The Turks are stepping back from their NATO role. Many people think, oh, Jim, you got that wrong. They've eliminated their NATO role. Wrong. I've got my sources that say they still got a small connection for parts and equipment for their entire military, in particular their Air Force. If their Air Force for 30 years was U.S. and German, French, and British built, you can't stop the supply line for parts. Okay, so they got a minimal parts connection. I believe what you're going to see is Turkey will go to the gold standard to relieve themselves of a financial crisis and a currency crisis and an economic crisis. And they will be dispatched. I think they've already gotten tapped on the shoulder by the Russians and Chinese to say, look, can you serve in this gold trade platform for the BRICS? Even though you're not in the BRICS, it's Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. The Turks have 1,000 years of gold experience in commerce, both in, financial trade of gold and the commercial trade of gold. They're a big player. They were an integral part of the Indian purchase of Iranian gold, bought with Turkish gold, paid for with Turkish gold. Three-party triangle. Okay, I think that serves as a prototype, and they're going to be acting, I believe, as a key intermediary for the BRICS gold platform, and eventually, say, the BRICS Development Bank, which I've been saying for 2 years, will eventually become a conversion center for Western sovereign bonds into gold. I think Turkey will be tapped to fulfill this role while given assistance in converting to the gold standard. That's my call for Turkey. And they get their full supply of Russian S-400, S-300 missiles for protection.
Yeah, which will keep the U.S. at bay.
Keep the U.S. at bay, and they might actually bring down, say, a French or British fighter jet and cause a new controversy.
Maybe they might bring down a French or British F-35.
An F-35 that has a failed defense system.
Oh man!
No, I'm not laughing. You are. I don't want to get the military to hate me, because I think already that.
No, I love the military. I just feel bad that they're given third-rate material in order to do a job. It's terrible. They're given like flying death traps. And Jim, I'll tell you this story. Last year, they brought the F-35 up to Stewart Air National Guard Base for the air show here in New York. So I went to go check it out. And there is and the pilots there, they're having a little media day, and the pilots are these are paid actors, literally espousing how wonderful the F-35 is. And this is just after like a few days of the news publishing the fact that it lost a dogfight with an F-16, and the F-16 had external drop tanks attached to it, and the F-35 still lost. Pathetic. Just so bad.
The F-16 lost a dogfight, an actual demonstration for the Pentagon. They lost to the F-5.
Yeah, I love the old F-5. That was a great plane.
They lost, and the decision was made by the Pentagon. We're still going to go with the F-16 because it has a bigger payload.
Yeah.
Okay, it's all about dropping bombs on defenseless nations.
Yep, that's it.
And you don't need strategic dogfight power to do that. You just need payload. Payload, for those who aren't familiar, is how much tonnage can they carry for dropping bombs, which they don't like calling anymore. They don't call them bomb. They call them ordnance.
Ordnance, and these are not wars anymore, Jim. It's kinetic action.
Kinetic action. Well,
kinetic action. That's what it is.
All right.
Oh man.
Boy,
Jim,
okay.
last but not least, the EU going to Russia. I mean, we've seen what's happened in Italy. They want these Russian sanctions stopped. The captains of industry want in Germany. They want these sanctions stopped. Austria is warming up quite nicely to the Russians as well. What say you? What's happening with the fracturing there? As the last topic.
I think all you have to do is look at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. And I cannot mention that without saying the Davos Economic Forum is not about economics. It's about bankers. It's a big elite banker barbecue. And I really wonder what's going on in the basement with little children in chains. Okay, the St. Pete Economic Forum had another big success with lots and lots of bilateral deals signed with Russia. Okay, that's what an economic forum is. I don't know of a single commercial deal signed at Davos. Ever! So if you look at St. Pete, what nation stuck out? Well, how about the 30 or 40 deals between France and Russia with a total of $23 billion? Now, I say every single one of them violated the U.S.-led sanctions against Russia. Then you had a follow-up with the President Macron, Emmanuel Macron. He met with a couple of different corporate leaders of Russian corporations in Paris, in the Kremlin, and it's all good. So they're moving forward with the deals. And Macron mentioned that in time, he said something like, in time we're going to see these Russian sanctions pushed aside. And we want to be prepared for that. Oh, no. He is pushing them aside, and he's not preparing for them. He's executing it. Meanwhile, the Germans are ignoring the U.S.-led sanctions and moving forward with Nord Stream 2, despite the U.S. interference for any German company involved in the finance or construction of Nord Stream 2. And the economic officials of Germany are moving forward with Russian trade. And for the last 4 years, they've had a very successful trade movement that bypasses the sanctions, whereby companies like BMW and Mercedes-Benz, Daimler-Benz, and Siemens, among other companies, quickly build manufacturing plants in Russia to sell product to the Russian economy. Now, if you think this is a multi-year process, you're wrong. They buy up a little underused Russian factory, they bring in the plant, retool it quickly, they're up and running with some production in 3 to 6 months. And it just ramps up. These are big success stories. So the sanctions have brought about a gigantic expansion of German industry in Russia. France is watching this and they say, we want some of that too. So look for Renault, the car maker, Peugeot, the car maker, and they're going to have to compete with Daimler-Benz and BMW. I don't think it's going to work out that well, but maybe the Russians will say, we'll help you with the low-end market, where the high end will be won by the Germans. The Germans win any battle economically that they enter. They're China's biggest trade partner from Europe. They're much bigger than Russia.
I remember quite fondly, because I'm a gearhead. And I remember quite fondly the question that was asked to Ferdinand Pike, the grandson of Ferry Porsche, who was the head of the Volkswagen dynasty right there. And Pike was asking, the reporters were asking a question because the Porsche 917 race car was absolutely decimating every racing event that it entered. And the question was posed, why do you win so much in racing? And the guy says, well, if we win in racing because they won't allow us to go to war. And that right there sums up German ingenuity and German engineering. It's second to none.
Well, the modern battlefield, much to the dismay of the Pentagon and the U.S. military complex, the modern day battlefield is trade. It's construction equipment. I look here in Costa Rica. There's, believe it or not, there's a significant commercial building, construction, trade going on, projects. There are two buildings that are within a mile of my own home. There's another building completed, a 25-story condo complex. It's completed. The money comes from China, and I look to see what are the marks, what are the brand names on the construction equipment. It's some Japanese, but it's a lot of German. And I occasionally see a Volvo name, Swedish. So it's mostly German, but also they have the Japanese and a little bit of Swedish. Okay, the Germans clean up. If you ever look to see, oh my gosh, look at that. They're dropping concrete on the 5th floor with a big scooper thing, but it's really not a scooper thing. It's a suction thing that sucks it up 5 stories and drops it on the 5th floor where they're building walls. What is that? It's German. That's what it is. These innovative construction equipment devices, they're almost all German. And the Japanese watch and they copy. They do what they do best. Right. They copy.
Right.
Komatsu copies. I don't know if there's a whole lot of innovation. I might get some hate mail on that. Probably a little bit of innovation, but most innovation comes from Germany.
Correct. Lexus copies.
I was looking at brand names because I was trying to get the full name of the Metallschaft German company, and I just couldn't find it because there's too many shafts in Germany. And I got a list of the major German corporations. My gosh, it's mind-boggling. There are 80, 90 of them.
Wow.
The German export trade is massive. They did not do what the United States did under the guiding hand of the Rockefeller Foundation, which was to export and outsource their industry to the Pacific Rim, and then to the emerging markets, and then to China. Mission accomplished. You have a dead industrial base in the United States. It's not entirely dead. It's just lacking critical mass. And just to show how much of a failure that policy was for the Rockefeller Foundation, which was the major impetus for it, all you have to look at is the U.S. trade deficit. It's $560 billion last year, and it will be more than $600 billion this year. The conclusion: you don't outsource your industry unless you want a systemic economic breakdown, which is what we're getting in the United States.
Well, Jim, we were told that we were going to get a service-based economy and that we don't need manufacturing anymore.
Well, it's called financial engineering, and in the early 2000 years, like 02, 03, Sir Alan Greenspan, who is a subject of the Queen of England and the court, announced that the U.S. financial engineering offloaded debt system is a resounding success, except that 3 years later we had the failure of Lehman Brothers and the beginning of the global financial crisis, whose roots are in financial engineering.
Yep. Absolutely right.
Okay,
Absolutely
so
right.
I believe, this is my fervent conviction and belief, Greenspan's mission for the globalists, the banker cabal, was to wreck the U.S. economy by bringing in financial engineering, which they knew would eventually break. Now we've got the same knucklehead, nonsensical, dipshit interpretation and promise that our bond market, which relies on financial engineering executed by the Fed, JP Morgan, and the U.S. Department of Treasury, is all rock solid. So,
well, did you hear what Larry Kudlow, he just came out. Cocaine Kudlow said just right now. Cocaine Kudlow just right now, Jim, came out and said that the U.S. economy is doing great. China, not so good.
Yeah, well, he got it backwards, but that's what he's paid to do. And I don't think he knows much of anything about economics. I mean, neither did Crud.
He knows how much a kilo of cocaine goes for, Jim. That's saying something.
Well, okay, but my point was that the economics Nobel Prize went to Krugman, and he doesn't know much about economics either. I'm not saying he's a cokehead. I'm just saying he doesn't know much about economics because he's a devout Keynesian, and they got it pretty much all wrong in the most recent years, deviating from what John Maynard Keynes actually promoted.
Right.
So it's a queer Keynesianism. But, here we are with financial engineering on steroids, with the interest rate swap derivative reliant by probably something like 70% of all treasury bonds being purchased in their demand. And we've got blessings coming from all the different major players. So I believe in the next year or two, we're likely to see a restructure of the U.S. government debt. In other words, a default. In 2009, I made a bold comment and forecast, V. I said in 2009 that we would see in the following years a $1 trillion deficit for as far as the eye can see, followed by a debt restructure default. And I've got the first part right, and I'm going to get the second part right because we're going to do a restructure. It might be behind the curtains. It might not be on the Wall Street Journal and New York Times and Washington Post, but it will happen.
Absolutely. Dr. Jim Willie, thank you so much, sir, for being on with us. And folks, again, the website is goldenjackass.com, goldenjackass.com. Go there, sign up for the hat trick letter. You will be absolutely pleased that you did. It is a wellspring of information and knowledge. And with that being said, thank you, Jim, for being on again. And the rest of you listeners have a great week. Take it away, CJ.
All right, thank you. I hope people go to goldenjackass.com and continue in their very nice, generous, lovely prayers for me and my protection.
Absolutely, man, especially after today. Did you know that Google cut out the first 2 minutes of our interview as soon as you started talking about the arrests and stuff? They cut it live, man. I mean, that never happens. Usually they wait until after it's uploaded, then they cut it, but they cut it live.
Wow.
Yeah, no audio for the first 2 minutes. I had to refreshing complete live stream, so yeah.
Well, I hope you didn't lose the rest of the interview.
Oh, no. It's all there.
No.
It's all there. Okay, I'm closing it out, V.
Okay.
Right.
Jim, have a great day, buddy. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Okay,
a lot of fun. Bye now.
Take care. Bye-bye.